welcome back or welcome to the Level Up Health Education Podcast. My name is Jeff Bartlett, and I'm here to help you level up your teaching. Hey everybody, Jeff here. Thanks again for tuning in. Hopefully you are doing well in this new year, and if you're in the Northeast and in Massachusetts, you have gotten rid of all the snow. Where I am off the coast, we got, I think, about 20 inches, so I know depending on where you are listening from in this part of the country or even the world, that might be a little or a lot, but there's plenty of shoveling done today for sure. So my oldest daughter, she is 6 and is currently on and has been on a Lego kick. And this enthusiasm for Legos is something I really enjoy because they were probably my favorite toy as a kid growing up. I have some really good memories of building different sets. I liked the ones that were the pirates and the sailors and the ships. And then later on, I got into some of the city builds, and then the Wild West sets with the forts and things like that were pretty cool. And I still remember sometimes, I'd have a Lego set up and I'd go to bed and I'd wake up and find that my dad had, set the figures up differently and made kind of a little story, which is really cool. So I'm able to connect my experience as a kid with her enthusiasm, and being able to sit with her and watch her put these sets together and helping when needed and also trying to step back when not is really been beneficial for me and valuable for me as a parent. And it also directly connects to my teaching as well. And that's something I want to talk about today, and how I'm trying to allow a lot of balance with this. So with her, that balance between allowing self-discovery and making mistakes, but also letting there be frustration and challenge and not stepping in too quickly. I don't want her to give up when she gets frustrated, and if she does, but just like in the classroom, I want her doing most of the work, just like I want most of my students doing the work. So this really made me think about scaffolding, and when we try to use that in the classroom for the benefit of our students, and how it can be really challenging to do it well. I think it's something that a lot of us do just inherently, but if we're really doing it according to how it's supposed to be done, it can be pretty challenging. And in today's episode, I want to briefly talk about scaffolding, do a quick review, but more specifically, give examples of what it looks like in health ed. And as I've been sitting with her, after the holidays, and she got a bunch more Lego sets to build, and as I've been working with her and just watching her do her thing, I want to connect that to some very specific parts of teaching skills-based health ed as well. So what is scaffolding? So a brief description is when the teacher provides support to their students as they're learning a new skill or a new task or a new content area, a new something. And it's really a temporary instructional support. And we are gradually removing those supports either throughout the lesson or throughout the unit. The basic example to think about, or the analogy, is construction, right? When you are building a new house, for example, or a new building, there is at first scaffolding that is put up to help support the workers and the structure and the foundation and everything. And those are gradually removed. And at the end, hopefully you have a well-built product. In exercise, for example, many exercises that we do have supports initially built in. For example, if you're trying to learn how to do good pull-ups, and I'm awful at pull-ups, and if I use them as part of a weightlifting routine or anything, I typically have to do them assisted, right? So some people will use, there's bands you can set up that you can hook up to the bar and put your knee in, or there are the machines where you can take off weight, right? And eventually you take those away as you become better at it, which I'm not there yet in pull-ups, but hey, that's okay. A couple key points. So scaffolding is done intentionally. It's an intentional support that we are providing students when they're accessing this new material. The scaffolding, the supports are supposed to be temporary. So gradually we remove these either as students are gaining competency or confidence, and as they are more independent. It can look like many different things. Maybe we are modeling something. Maybe there are guided practices going on. If we are doing any writing, you might have sentence frames and sentence stems and things like that, or provide visuals. It might be how you decide to question students. Um, Effective scaffolding should also respond to a student need. So it's something that we can adjust. So when we formatively assess our students and we get data from them, we know maybe we have to put a scaffold back, or maybe we can remove one sooner than we thought, or maybe we have to keep it in place for a little bit longer. And ultimately, the goal of all of this scaffolding is not for students to depend on these scaffolds, but it's to gain independence, right? They're becoming independent learners in that way. And eventually, they should complete the task successfully on their own. One common example you might see of scaffolding is the I do, we do, you do sequence of teaching, where during the first part, the I do, the teacher is the expert and they are modeling something. Teachers are thinking aloud, and I'll connect this to skills-based health ed in a couple minutes here. And then it shifts to the we do, which is when the students are involved in a guided practice, but the teacher is giving feedback, the teacher is involved. This is where that strategic questioning that I mentioned comes into play. And then the you do section, and that's the independent practice. So that's one way to think about a progression, but the scaffolds that you choose to put in within each section, especially the guided practice, would depend on a lot of different factors that we're not necessarily going to get into today. So what does this look like in a skills-based health education classroom? Well, there are a lot of connections here. I'm thinking about skill modeling. I'm thinking about guided practice, how we break things down, the feedback we give to students, and ultimately how they are independently demonstrating a skill. So I want to start out with modeling a skill. Now, I've talked about skill modeling a little bit here and there in different newsletters I've sent out and presentations that I've given, and maybe even on this podcast that I have to check back. But when we are modeling a skill, it's important that we're using out loud thinking. So, for example, when I'm modeling writing a SMART goal, right, I'm walking through it and I explain it step by step, as well as what's going on in my head. So students can hear that and hear my thinking, much like they would when they write a SMART goal. Same thing with something like decision making. I am walking through the process, knowing that in a real life situation, they have probably 1.5 seconds to make a decision. If that, maybe even a shorter amount of time than that. But the important thing is when I go step by step, they're seeing the cognitive effort that it takes to really make that skill happen and make that skill come alive. One quick note about modeling is that we should make the scenarios as real life as possible. Relevancy is really important when we do this. So much like we're modeling these skills in real life situations, when I'm sitting with my daughter and she's building Legos, I might have to demonstrate how to connect pieces, or maybe how to look at the instructions in a specific way, depending on how the drawings are, the visuals are, and maybe giving her example to follow, things like that. Something that she actually had to show me, and I wish I had this when I was a kid, is some of her kits have come with what is the classic brick separator. And it's a really cool tool, and it does like 4 different things, and it makes it so much easier to separate bricks, especially the little thin ones that are hard to get off. But you can put it on top of bricks, underneath them. It's got a thing that like pushes out, the long cylinder type Lego bricks, and it has one that can really pry off like the super thin ones that don't have any of the dots on them, which I know have a specific name that I can't remember at this point. But I thought that was really cool, and she actually had to show me that. The next thing to think about is guided practice. So if I have modeled a skill, the next step is for students to practice these skills. Again, let's say it's decision making. I'm giving them prompts, I'm giving them scenarios, right? And maybe we walk through it step by step. So if it's something like decision making, maybe we are only isolating the first 2 steps. If I'm using the decide model, I want to focus on just determining the decision and then examining or exploring options. And we go from there. And then maybe you review, and then you continue and you move on. So this guided practice is really important. And how I connect this to my Lego experience, right, is sometimes some things are a little bit more difficult with how things go on, right? Little hands can't necessarily do everything that adult hands can strength wise, although there are other things she can do that I can't with the Legos, right? But helping guide her through these difficult steps, but then gradually allowing her to take the lead. And it's really cool when she gets excited to do that too. So that's been cool to see as well. Now, sometimes we have to break down a skill in more detail. So I keep coming back to decision making because there are multiple steps there, but maybe it's analyzing influences and there's a 3 or 4 step process that you use and you break this skill down into smaller steps, right? And then you continue to apply them in a real life scenario. And so sometimes, right, it's easy when you have that big pile of bricks in front of you to get overwhelmed. Be like, how am I ever going to put this set together, whether it's 70 pieces or 700? Holy moly, right? And they make it a little bit easier now. They separate the Legos into different number bags, which is pretty cool, but similar, right, to breaking a skill down. Hey, let's focus on one step at a time. We are only going to focus on the first bag right now. Do not worry about what comes after. Let's just do this. And just like setting a goal, right, little steps are important. Providing feedback is also really important, and our feedback should be specific and actionable. It should be based on our success criteria. We're not saying like, hey, good job, bad job, this was awesome, this was awful. It's really connected to whatever skill success criteria you have developed based on skill cues and things like that. And so, again, when I offer feedback to my daughter, I'm trying to give her enough information that she knows, okay, like maybe this doesn't quite fit the way it should, or when I look at this compared to the instructions, it looks a little bit different, right? So kind of offering feedback in a way that allows her to figure it out on her own. We want to do that with our students as well, and thinking about giving them that independence in that way, which is the next thing to think about. Ideally, we are gradually releasing responsibility. You'll hear that when you look at anything about scaffolding. The gradual release of responsibility will remove students away from that guided practice to these scenarios, to using these in real life situations. And to quote my friend Andy Milne and one of his former students, the real test for health class is life, right? But unfortunately, we can't follow students around with clipboards and decide to, check off the boxes if they do or do not demonstrate these skills over time. However, right, if we follow our skill development model, right, we are gradually releasing that responsibility, much like over time. And as my daughter's confidence and competence have both grown, if she gets a new Lego set, she can open the box and she's off to the races without me really needing to do anything. So in both scenarios, whether it's in the classroom teaching skills-based health ed or watching my daughter build with Legos, right? The emphasis is really on supporting, right? I'm supporting my students as learners. I'm supporting my daughter as a learner. The goal is to acquire these skills, right? And to apply them. And it does take this kind of combination of modeling and practice and feedback and then independence. And all of this comes back to the skill development model, right? Of how we introduce our skill and explain why it's important and then model it and students practice it and get feedback and then they apply it in real life situations. Some other things to think about too is by making sure we are using scaffolding appropriately, we're doing a lot of other things. We're encouraging problem solving, like how we choose to ask questions of our students instead of leading them to answers. You might say, hey, how else could you approach this particular problem with the skill of decision making? Like, what are some alternative options that aren't initially coming up for you right now, right? And encouraging them to think through challenges, much like I might say to my daughter, hey, like, what happens if you try turning that Lego piece this other way, right? Um, how we check for understanding is really important in Legos. Hey, does this look like the picture? Instead of saying that doesn't look like the picture or it does, right? They can figure that out on their own, much like we would have students maybe summarize at the end of a lesson what they've learned, or we do a quick skill practice before we decide to move on. Also, if we're using scaffolding, we're offering encouragement to our students too. And so we want to keep them motivated. And then again, same thing with building with Legos. We can also adjust different supports and scaffolds based on needs. So in an ideal world, I would love to regroup students every class, but I just can't do that with 200 something students and time and things like that, right? But we might decide to revisit different concepts with one group or move forward with another group, much like different Kids have different needs or experiences with Legos, but yeah, eventually that goal is to build independence. Again, I come back to the zone of proximal development where we can make a lot of progress when we are just outside of our comfort zone, right? It's like Goldilocks principle, it's just right. And that's the environment we're trying to create with our students. And in ways, an environment I'm trying to create with my daughter when she builds Legos too. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Level Up Health Education Podcast. My name is Jeff Bartlett, and if you like this, please share it with your favorite health educators. Please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. I also have a free newsletter, the Level Up Health Education newsletter, and you can find a link to subscribe in the show notes. And as always, thanks for your support.